The first thing I remember about that night was the silence. It wasn't the soft, comforting kind of silence you feel when you're drifting to sleep, but the heavy kind, the kind that presses against your ears until you start to wonder if something has stolen all the sound from the world. I was sitting alone on the porch of the Lakeside cabin, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fog roll across the water. The moonlight was thin and pale, flickering between low clouds, and every time the light faded, the water seemed to move differently, not like waves, but like something beneath it was breathing. The air smelled damp, like pine needles and old smoke. Every once in a while, the boards of the dock would creak, even though no one was walking there. I told myself it was just the wood settling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Behind me, the cabin lights flickered once, then went out completely, leaving only the dim reflection of the moon on the lake. My breath clouded in front of me, and in that stillness, I felt it, something watching from across the water. Not a person, not an animal, just something. And as the mist parted, I saw a pale shape standing at the edge of the tree line. Too still to be human, too dark to be shadow. That's when I realized I never should have stayed here alone. It was late, the kind of late where the air feels heavier than it should. Autumn had been slow to fade that year, and the lake still carried the warmth of the summer that refused to die. But tonight, it felt different. The fog had rolled in before the sun even set. Thick, cold, like it knew something I didn't. I stood at the edge of the gravel path, where the dirt met the water. The dock stretched out in front of me, long, uneven planks that vanished into the mist. I could smell the damp wood, hear the slow ripple of water beneath it. And then I saw it, a lantern, dim, yellow, swaying at the very end of the dock. It shouldn't have been there. No one stayed near the lake anymore, not since the floods last year. Every cabin nearby was boarded up, empty, yet the lantern moved, just slightly, like someone was holding it. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a trick of the fog, how light bends and breaks over water. But the sway was too steady, too human. I took a step closer. The boards moaned beneath my boots, a sound that vanished too quickly into the silence around me. The closer I got, the colder the air became. My breath came out in small bursts of white, drifting away like ghosts of themselves. Each step was slower than the last, each creak louder. The lantern didn't flicker. It stayed lit, calm, patient. Halfway down the dock, I stopped. There were footprints, fresh and wet, leading toward me, bare feet, small, each print filled with a thin layer of lake water, glistening faintly under the glow. I looked back toward the shore. There was no one, no second pair of steps, but mine. And yet, the lantern swayed again. It wasn't wind. The fog was too still for that. Something invisible moved at the edge of the light. A small distortion, like heat over asphalt. I could feel it watching me. My hands felt numb, my throat dry. But I kept walking. The planks grew slick under my shoes. Water dripped somewhere, slow, rhythmic, tapping against the wood below. A strange hum rose from beneath the dock, low and steady, blending with the faint lapping of water. By the time I reached the end, the lantern had stopped moving. It hung from a rusted hook, still dripping. The glass was cracked. Inside, the flame danced weakly, fighting the fog. And beside it, footprints again, leading off the dock, straight into the lake. I followed them with my eyes, down where the light bent and disappeared under the water's surface. The prints went deep, one after another, until the final one vanished into darkness. I crouched, touched the wood. It was warm, not like the rest of the dock, like someone had just been standing there. The air shifted. Something brushed past my sleeve. Cold, wet. I turned, quick, but there was only mist behind me, curling like breath. Then I heard it, a single drop, falling from nowhere. Then another, closer. I lifted my hand, and a bead of water landed on my palm. I looked up. The fog above me rippled, like something moved through it. Shapes or shadows impossible to tell. But the air began to hum again, soft and low, like a voice trying not to speak. The lantern flickered. Once, twice, then steadied again, brighter this time. Through the glass, I saw something reflected. A pale outline behind me, standing where I'd been only seconds ago. Still, silent, my chest tightened. The air felt too thick to breathe. When I turned back, the lantern light dimmed again, and the reflection was gone. Only water remained, still dripping from the boards. I stared at the lake for a long time, waiting for ripples, for movement, for anything that made sense. But the surface was perfectly calm. I reached for the lantern. The metal was slick, rusted, and warm again, like a pulse beneath my fingertips. A faint whisper ran through the fog, too soft to understand, but close enough to feel against my ear. It sounded like a breath, then a word, then nothing. I backed away slowly. The dock groaned, each plank complaining as I stepped off it. The light stayed behind me, small and trembling, until the mist swallowed it whole. By the time I reached the shore, the hum had stopped. The fog began to thin, and the world felt empty again. But when I turned for one last look, the lantern had returned, still swaying, still waiting, and below it, in the pale reflection of the lake, 2 sets of footprints now, mine and someone else's. The cabin sat deeper in the woods than I remembered, past the thin birch trees, past the overgrown trail that used to be clear. The fog had followed me from the lake, pale and restless, clinging to the air like breath that wouldn't fade. Even from the porch, I could smell the damp wood swollen from years of rain and silence. When I opened the door, the hinges didn't resist. They just sighed. Inside, everything was still. The air felt untouched, too still to be empty. Dust floated in pale streaks of light, leaking through the curtains. I could hear the faint hum of the lake outside, muffled by distance and time. The furniture was just as it used to be, old pine, uneven floors, a cracked mirror near the fireplace. It felt like someone had been here recently, or like someone had never left. On the table by the window sat the guestbook, leather cover, warped and faded, the same one that used to sit there when I was a child. I remember my mother's handwriting inside it, neat, careful loops. She'd written our names every summer. Visitors would sign too, neighbors, friends, people passing through. I brushed the cover with my hand. It felt soft, almost warm. The edges were frayed, the pages inside yellow with moisture. When I opened it, the smell of paper and dust rose into the air. The first few pages were familiar, names, dates, little notes about fishing trips and thunderstorms. I smiled. For a moment, it felt gentle, like touching something that still remembered me. But as I turned the pages, the ink began to change. The handwriting grew shaky. Names I didn't recognize. Dates that didn't make sense. Some crossed out, some written over each other, as if the same person kept trying to sign again. The ink bled into the paper, dark, uneven, as though the pen had trembled in someone's hand. A few entries caught my eye. Ellen stayed 3 nights. Loved the view. Thomas went swimming, never came back. Marla heard footsteps in the attic, left before sunrise. Each line looked rushed. Each one ended with a small blot of ink, like the pen had been pulled away too quickly. I kept reading. My fingers left faint prints on the edges of the pages, damp from the cold. The further I turned, the stranger became. Some names repeated. The same handwriting, written years apart. The same names that should have faded long ago. And then I saw one I recognized. Ellen. The same name from before. But this time beside the date, a small line in shaky letters, back again. Can't leave. My stomach tightened. Outside, something rustled in the leaves. A single step, maybe 2. I froze, waited, but the sound faded, or maybe the fog swallowed it. I turned another page. The paper was newer here, whiter, fresher ink. Each entry was more desperate than the last. Some written in thick, uneven strokes that pressed deep into the paper. Still here, still waiting. The water won't let go. Then the last page. There was only one entry. The ink was still wet, smudged where the hand had dragged slightly across the letters. I felt my throat tighten as I read it. It was my name, written exactly in my handwriting. and below it today's date. For a moment, my brain refused to make sense of it. I hadn't written it. I hadn't even touched the pen lying next to the book. The tip of it was glistening with black ink, still dripping. A faint hum crept through the cabin walls, low, steady, like something alive behind the wood. The air moved, slow and cold. The curtains shifted slightly, though the windows were shut. I stepped back from the table. My heartbeat echoed in the silence, soft, irregular. The mirror by the fireplace caught my eye. There was movement in it, but I wasn't moving. A shape leaned over the book, pale, blurred by distance, tracing the letters of my name with an unseen hand. The lantern flame outside flickered once against the glass. Then everything went still again. I stared until my reflection steadied, until the cabin looked normal. Empty. The guest book lay open. Pages still breathing faintly in the quiet air. I thought about closing it, about leaving. But as I turned toward the door, a new line appeared beneath my name, written slow, deliberate. Welcome back. The ink shimmered faintly, as though still being written. Invisible fingers dragging through the wet black. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Outside, the fog thickened again. And somewhere out by the lake, a single lantern began to sway. The storm had passed hours ago, but the air still smelled of rain. Wet wood, cold metal, something faint like rust beneath the floorboards. I couldn't sleep. The lake outside had gone silent. No ripples, no wind brushing through the trees. Even the insects had gone still. Just a faint hum of the clock on the wall. 3:02 a.m. I watched the lantern flicker by the window, its flame shrinking low, fighting the dark that pressed against the glass. The fog had crept close again, thick enough to swallow the outline of the trees, thick enough to hide whatever might be standing just beyond it. That's when I heard it. A single knock, soft, slow, on the front door. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the cabin settling. It was a deliberate sound, knuckles against wood. I sat still. Every breath felt too loud. The knock didn't come again. For a long time, I just listened. The clock ticked once. Then again. Finally, I stood. Each step toward the door made the floor groan beneath me, dry with stretching under weight. The metal latch was cold when I touched it. I hesitated, then opened the door. Nothing, just the fog, and the faint drip of water from the roof. The air outside was colder than before. The mist curled around my ankles, slow and heavy, like it didn't want me to leave. But then I noticed it. The smell, not the scent of rain anymore. Something else. Earthy, metallic. I looked down. The porch was wet. Dark patches spread across the boards, gleaming under the faint light from inside, like something had been standing there, dripping. I closed the door, locked it. The silence after felt heavier than before, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. Then came the next sound, a tap, this time from the window. I turned slowly. The glass trembled. A small shape appeared against it, a handprint, wet, smudged, fingers long and thin, sliding down the glass before fading into streaks. I backed away, my shoulders brushing against the wall. And that's when I saw more. Across the cabin, faint handprints bloomed where there hadn't been any, along the window frames, near the ceiling, even across the wooden beams above, each one dripping, each one fresh. The knock started again, not one this time, a slow rhythm. Door, then window, then the back wall, circling, the air pulsed with it. Each thud soft enough to almost blend with my heartbeat. I could hear the faint splash of water somewhere, like footsteps pacing through shallow puddles outside. I wanted to move, but I didn't. My breath fogged in front of me. The lantern light quivered. And for a moment, I thought I saw movement. A blur behind the curtain, brushing past the edge of the glass. Then silence. Just like that. The kind that presses against your ears until you start to hear your own pulse. I reached for the window. The wood frame was slick, cold. When I drew my hand back, my fingers were damp, the water smeared dark across my skin. I looked closer. The streaks on the wall weren't random. They curved slightly, like someone had dragged their palms along the surface, tracing invisible shapes. A circle, a spiral, a smear of red mixed with the wetness. It looked almost like writing. I turned toward the door again. The knocking had stopped completely now, but something else had started. A faint dripping sound. Inside, I followed it past the fireplace, toward the small hallway near the back. The light there was pale, shifting, like the fog itself was seeping through the cracks. When I reached the end, I saw it, on the wall near the doorframe, a single perfect handprint, smaller than the others, pressed deep into the wood, still dripping, and above it, another, and another, all the way up to the ceiling. My throat tightened. The air was colder there, sharp, biting. Every breath burned a little. Then I heard it, a whisper, not words, just breath, moving just behind me. I turned. The lantern on the table flickered once more before going out. Darkness folded over everything. Only the pale moonlight from the window remained, soft and gray. In that light I saw them. The handprints shimmered faintly, wet streaks glowing where they caught the dim light. And as I watched, they began to move, slowly, downward, as if something was crawling along the walls, leaving fresh marks behind. The knocking returned, 3 sharp knocks this time. Then nothing. The silence after was total. 2 total. Even the lake outside had stopped breathing. I backed into the center of the room, heart thudding so hard it felt like the walls could hear it. Every shadow seemed to tilt toward me, every window too dark to see through. Then one final knock, right behind me. I turned. No door there, just a wall. A wet print bloomed where the sound had come from, slow, deliberate, 5 thin fingers pressing through the wood. I didn't move, didn't scream. I just watched as the handprint began to fade, leaving behind nothing but the scent of rain and the faint hum of silence. Outside, the fog swallowed the cabin whole, and by morning, the lake would look untouched, as if no one had ever been here at all. The fog came early that night, thick, low, heavy enough to swallow the lake whole. I'd left the lantern by the window, its faint glow trembling against the glass. Outside, everything was pale gray. The water, the sky, even the trees blurred into one shape. Only the dock reached out like a shadow, lost halfway into the mist. The air smelled damp, metallic, almost sweet. I could taste it when I breathed. For a while I just listened. The cabin silence. The slow drip from the roof. The faint hum of the lantern flame. Then, under all that, a sound, soft, almost too soft to notice. It came from the lake. A tune, gentle, slowly rising and falling, like someone humming through water. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the fog didn't move. The air didn't stir. The sound stayed steady, each note drifting closer, round and distant, carrying something human, a voice. It sounded like a lullaby, something old, something meant to soothe. I leaned closer to the window. The glass was cold against my skin. Outside, the mist pulsed faintly, as though the fog itself was breathing with the rhythm of the song. The melody curled across the lake in soft waves. It didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere, from above, from beneath. I could almost make out the shape of words, stretched, slurred by distance. But the closer I listened, the less they made sense. Something about the voice felt wrong, too clear, too familiar. I stepped outside. The wooden boards of the porch were slick with dew, the night colder now. Each breath left a cloud that hung in front of me, slow to fade. The fog brushed against my hands when I reached out. It felt alive. The humming grew louder, still soft but closer, nearer than it should have been. I walked down toward the dock, careful not to slip. Every step groaned beneath me, swallowed almost instantly by the mist. The water below was still. No ripples, no reflection, just black glass stretching out into nowhere. And then the voice again, this time clearer, lower. It wasn't coming from across the lake anymore. It was just beneath the dock, right under where I stood. I knelt down slowly, one hand resting on the wet wood. The humming vibrated through it, Faint but real, like the voice was pressed right against the underside of the boards. It changed tone, shifted slightly, and for a moment, I thought I recognized it. It sounded like me, the same pitch, the same rhythm I use when I hum without thinking. A habit I'd never noticed until now. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard. But as I did, the voice matched the movement, pausing when I did, then continuing, perfectly in sync. The fog around me rippled. Something brushed past my leg. Cold, thin, gone in an instant. The voice began to distort. Longer notes, deeper, like it was being dragged through the water. It didn't sound like a lullaby anymore. It sounded like breathing. Wet, uneven, trying to form words through the hum. I leaned over the edge of the dock. The air grew heavy, pressing against my ears, like the world was holding its breath. The water shifted, just slightly. A faint shimmer beneath the surface. Too dark to see, too pale to ignore. Then I heard it again. Now hum this time. A voice, muffled but mine. It whispered the tune back to me. Every note, every pause, perfectly mirrored. My reflection flickered in the water, but it wasn't right. It didn't move when I did. It only watched, mouth open just slightly. The humming came from it now. Slowly, the reflection's lips began to move, forming the same pattern as the song. But I wasn't singing anymore. My mouth was still. The reflection smiled, just barely, then sank, disappearing beneath the dark. The sound followed it, pulling downward, fading like breath underwater. The fog shuddered once, then stilled. I stayed there, waiting, listening, but the air had gone quiet again. Only the faint ticking of water against the dock. Only the cold pressing at my throat. When I finally turned back toward the cabin, something soft trailed behind me, an echo of the same melody. So faint I thought I imagined it, but it was still there. Inside, the lantern's light was dim, barely holding on. I shut the door and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The lake outside was gone now, just fog, a thick wall of white swallowing everything beyond the porch. I sat by the window, listening to the silence, waiting for the voice to return. And just as I began to think it wouldn't, I heard it again, right behind the glass. Soft, low, perfectly in tune with my own breath. The nights had started blending together, fog rolling low through the trees, pressing against the windows until even the lantern light felt dim. I'd lost count of how long I'd been here. There was only one thing that kept time anymore, the clock. It sat on the mantel above the fireplace. Tall, carved oak, its brass pendulum swaying behind glass that always seemed too clean for how dusty everything else was. I didn't remember bringing it here. Maybe it had always been part of the cabin. The first few nights, I barely noticed it. Just another relic left behind by someone who never came back. But then the ticking began to change. It was faint at first, just a heartbeat tucked inside the quiet, soft enough to forget, until it wasn't. Each night it grew louder, sharper, like it was sinking deeper into the wood of the walls, into the floor beneath my feet. By the fourth night, I could feel it through my pillow, the steady rhythm following me even in sleep. Tick, pause, tick, always the same pace, never faster, never slower. The air around it seemed to hum now, a faint vibration, almost like breath trapped inside the glass. At midnight, it always stopped, completely. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that presses against your ribs, that makes your ears ring from the absence. Even the forest would go still, no wind, no crickets, no shifting trees, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then, sometime later, I could never tell when, the ticking would start again, always softer at first, then rising, growing bolder as the night went on. I tried to wind it once. The keyhole turned easily, but it never seemed to run out of power. The hands were cold when I touched them, colder than metal should be. The glass fogged under my breath. But when I stepped back, there was no trace of it. That's when I noticed the markings. Tiny scratches around the edge of clock face. Not numbers, little etchings, faint and uneven. They looked like tally marks. Old ones. Dozens of them. I leaned closer. There were new ones, too, freshly carved. I counted them once. There were 6 the first time, then 8, then 10. Every night, another one appeared. It wasn't counting hours. It was counting nights. Or something else. I started keeping track myself, marking the days on the table by the window. But by the next morning, my marks were always gone. The wood was smooth again, clean. The only thing that changed was the clock. Each night, as midnight drew near, the ticking grew slower, thicker, like it was pulling the sound from the air, one breath at a time. Tick, tick, and then, when the hands reached 12, silence. Even the fog seemed to stop moving. The trees outside stood frozen, their branches pale and still. The flame in the lantern still, too, frozen mid-flicker, as though time itself was holding its breath. It would last only a moment, but that moment stretched too long, like the world forgot how to move. And then I'd hear it, a faint rustle from somewhere deep in the woods, always distant, always closer the next night. It came like a whisper brushing through the branches, like footsteps too slow to be real. The first time, I told myself it was a wind. The second time, I stopped believing that. Now I don't even try. Tonight, the clock has 13 marks. The pendulum swings slower than before, scraping faintly each time it passes the edge of the glass. The air feels colder, wetter. I can smell the lake from here, even though the windows are closed. And I can hear it. Faint splashes, like something moving just beneath the surface. Tick, tick, tick. The minute hand trembles, one line away from midnight. My chest tightens. I don't know why, but I already know what's coming. The pendulum swings once more, stops mid-arc, and everything goes quiet. I wait. The silence folds around me. The air presses in, thick and still. Outside, the fog hangs motionless, white and endless. Then, somewhere in that quiet, I hear a second ticking, not from the clock, from the floor, right beside me. Tick, tick. I look down. Small droplets slide across the wood, clear and slow, like water dripping from something unseen. The clock's hands begin to move again, but they're not starting at 12. They're counting backward, each tick louder, each one closer. And through the glass, I can see a new mark being carved on its face. Slow, deliberate. The 14th. I think I understand now. It isn't counting time. It's counting me. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the cabin still smelled like wet wood and moss. The kind of scent that clings to your clothes long after you leave the forest. I couldn't sleep. The air was heavy, the kind that makes each breath feel slower than it should. The fire had gone out, but the room still held its faint orange memory, flickering in the glass of the old clock. I'd gotten used to the quiet here, the stillness between the trees, the way sound doesn't really travel in fog. But that night, something changed. It started with a single creak. Right above me, just a shift in the wood. Maybe a board settling. That's what I told myself. Then came another, heavier, measured, footsteps, slow, even, crossing the ceiling. I lay there staring at the dark beams above my bed, the same beams that were supposed to be the roof. There wasn't supposed to be anything up there. No stairs, no attic, just the roof and the trees above it. The air grew colder. The lantern flame trembled, as though something was moving just beyond the walls. Another step, then another, each one right above where my head rested. Each one careful, almost deliberate. Dust drifted down in thin, soft lines. I could taste it, dry and old, like paper left in the rain. I didn't move, didn't even blink. The next step was sharper, right above my chest. Then a pause. It was listening. The silence was so deep it hummed in my ears. I could hear my heartbeat, fast, uneven. Then another creak, closer this time. My throat felt tight, my hand slick against the blanket. I thought maybe if I stayed still enough, it would stop. It didn't. The steps began to move again, pacing slowly from one end of the ceiling to the other, back and forth, back and forth. Each pass loosened more dust, Faint streaks of gray floating down through the air. They landed on my skin, soft as ash. I whispered into the dark. Just one word. Hello. The pacing stopped. Everything went still. Even the air froze. The fog outside pressed against the window pane, pale and unmoving. I waited. Seconds passed like hours. Then a new sound. A faint dragging, like a heel sliding over wood, followed by a low, slow scrape that seemed to circle above me, tracing the shape of the room. I pressed my hand against the wall beside the bed. It was vibrating, barely, but enough to feel. Something was walking in circles up there, tracing me. My breath fogged the air, even though the fire had long died. I could see it, small clouds rising and vanishing, over and over. Then the steps stopped again, right above my face. The dust rained harder this time, sifting through my hair, sticking to my eyelashes. I stared upward. I thought I saw a shadow pass between the beams, thin, shifting, then gone. The wood above me groaned like something kneeling down. Close. Too close. I could hear the faintest inhale, shallow and quiet, then a tap, right against the ceiling, in the same rhythm as a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3, then silence again. The clock on the mantel clicked over to midnight, and as it did, the footsteps began again, but this time they were moving toward the far corner of the room. I followed the sound with my eyes. It stopped directly above the door that led outside. The latch rattled once, just once, then went still. The fog outside swirled against the window like breath on glass. For a moment, I thought I saw something there, a pale outline press against the mist, the faint curve of face I couldn't quite see. I wanted to get up, to leave, but my body felt like it was sinking into the mattress. Then I realized something. The ceiling was sagging, just slightly. The boards bowed inward, as though the weight above them had grown heavier. More dust fell, then a crack, small, sharp, but real. I covered my mouth, afraid to make a sound, afraid it would hear. The footsteps began again, faster this time. Pacing, angry. The beams trembled. Then silence, a long pause. I thought maybe it was over, until I felt it, a faint, steady vibration coming from inside the walls. Not above me anymore. Inside, moving downward, slowly. I watched the shadow along the ceiling edge stretch toward the wall. It slipped lower, following the outline of the wood until it reached the floorboards by my bed. Then it stopped. The room was completely still again. No footsteps, no ticking, no breath but mine. I waited. Minutes passed, maybe more. Then, from the darkness beside the bed, one single creak, like weight shifting on old wood. And then nothing. The air was empty again. The silence deeper than before, almost peaceful. I lay there until the first pale light of morning crept through the window. The ceiling looked normal, the floor untouched. No dust, no footprints. But when I stepped outside, I saw them, faint impressions in the damp earth above the cabin roof. Bare feet, facing the window, and though the air was still, I swear I could feel a slow, quiet pacing somewhere just above my head. The fog never really leaves the lake. Even in daylight, it clings to the surface like breath on glass. Soft silver, endless. That morning, the air was colder than usual. Each exhale lingered in front of me before fading into the mist. I could hear the faint hum of insects somewhere beyond the trees, muffled, distant. The cabin stood quiet behind me, a dark shape swallowed by the woods. I'd woken before sunrise, drawn outside for no real reason. Maybe I just wanted to see if the world still looked the same. The water was still, too still, not a ripple. When I leaned closer, my reflection appeared. Pale, tired, half drowned in the fog. I watched it blink. It blinked back, but something felt delayed, like it wasn't keeping up. I moved my hand slowly just to test it. The reflection followed, a moment too late, barely noticeable, but enough. I stared at it for a long time. The air around me felt thick, heavier than before. A low hum threaded through the silence, deep in the water. When I tilted my head, The reflection didn't. It stayed perfectly straight. Its eyes, my eyes, fixed on me. A chill moved through my arms. I stepped back, stones crunching under my boots. The reflection stayed where it was, staring up as if waiting. The fog curled between us. I thought maybe it was a trick, the light or the way the mist played with distance. But then it smiled, slowly, too slowly, the kind of smile that feels stretched, deliberate. It didn't reach the eyes. My own lips didn't move. I took another step back. The smile grew wider. The edges of its mouth seemed to tremble, as though it were trying not to laugh. The lake's surface rippled once, a soft pulse, but the reflection stayed perfectly clear, unmoving. The water around it shifted, but it didn't distort. I whispered to myself, "Stop." The reflection's lips parted. It didn't speak, but I could see the shape of the word, the exact same one I just said, then silence again, the kind that presses in on both sides. My breath caught. The fog drifted closer, wrapping around my arms like cool hands. The smell of wet leaves, of old wood, filled the air. I wanted to leave, but something in that face, in my face, wouldn't let me. It was studying me now, watching the way I breathed, the way my eyes moved. And then it blinked, not at the same time as me, a second too soon, like it knew what I was about to do. The water stirred, not wind, something underneath, a faint ripple that circled outward and died. I leaned closer again, against every instinct. I couldn't help it. There was something beautiful about it, that slow, knowing calm, the way it smiled as though it pitied me. The surface between us shimmered, and for a moment, I thought I saw it reach up, not a full movement, but a shimmer beneath the reflection, a shadow of fingers pressing toward the surface. I backed away quickly, my heels slipping against the wet earth. Cold mud splashed against my leg. The reflection didn't flinch. It stayed standing, face tilted, smile unbroken. The fog had thickened now. I could barely see the far shore, only the faint outline of the trees bending over the water. I turned toward the cabin. But before I walked away, I looked back, just once. The lake looked empty again, calm. Only the fog remained. I almost felt foolish. Just another trick of light. Another moment alone too long in this place. I went back inside, closed the door, lit the fire. But something caught my eye in the reflection of the window. Through the glass, across the yard, the lake shimmered faintly in the distance. And in that shimmer, a figure, standing at the water's edge. Still, perfectly still. I told myself it was my reflection again, that it had to be, until it lifted its arm and waved. I froze. My own hand stayed at my side. The figure smiled, that same stretched, trembling smile, the one I'd seen on the lake. The fog rolled in thicker, swallowing whole. I stared for a long time, until the fire cracked behind me. When I finally looked away, the window had fogged over completely, my own reflection soft and pale against the glass. And in that moment it smiled again. Not mine, not anymore. I wiped the glass, but the smile didn't fade. It stayed there, faint, blurred, but real. Still watching, still waiting. The lake was quiet again outside, but I could feel it, that slow hum beneath everything, like something breathing under the surface, waiting for me to look again. And I think, next time I will. The rain began just after dusk. Not gentle, not sudden, just steady, a soft rhythm against the windows, like fingertips tracing the glass. The cabin felt smaller when it rained. The walls breathed with the storm. The air thickened, heavy with damp wood, and the faint scent of pine. Outside, the porch light swayed in the wind, throwing a pale circle of light over the old rocking chair. It had been there since I arrived. Weathered, still, it never moved. Not once. Even when the wind howled through the trees, it stayed perfectly still, like it belonged to the storm itself. Tonight, though, something felt different. The rain had a strange rhythm, like something was shifting between the drops. Almost a hum, almost a breath. I sat near the fire, pretending to read. but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward that chair. It was barely visible beyond the porch, just a darker shape in the rain. But I couldn't stop watching it. Something about it pulled at me, a quiet expectation, like someone was waiting there. A low creak broke through the storm. Soft, slow. I froze. It came again. That deep, uneven groan of wood bending under weight. The rocking chair was moving. At first, I told myself it was a wind. But the air outside was still now. The rain had slowed, falling in gentle sheets. Yet the chair kept rocking. Forward, back, forward, back. I could almost feel the rhythm in my chest, like it was syncing with my heartbeat. The porch light flickered once, dimmed, then steadied. And for a moment, I thought I saw something, a shape faint, seated there. Too faint to describe, too dark to deny. I pressed my hand against the window pane. Cold, wet condensation smeared beneath my fingers. The chair kept moving. It wasn't fast. It wasn't violent. It was deliberate. The kind of movement made by someone lost in thought. Someone waiting. The air inside the cabin grew still. The fire's crackle softened, as if muffled by something unseen. Every sound felt swallowed, like the room itself was holding its breath. I whispered to no one. "Who's there?" The words came out thin, almost drowned by the rain. No answer, only the steady rhythm of that chair. I thought about opening the door, just stepping out, touching it, proving to myself it was nothing. But something in me, deep instinctive, told me not to. So I waited. The chair kept rocking. Each movement slower now, heavier. And then it stopped. Completely. The porch light flickered again, brighter this time, just enough to show the chair clearly. Empty. Wet. Still. But beneath it, the wood was damp. A small, dark puddle had formed where no rain could have reached. Like something had been sitting there, dripping. I stepped back from the window. My heart was too loud in the silence. Too fast. The air felt colder. My reflection in the glass looked pale, strained, like it didn't quite belong to me. Then, behind that reflection, a shape, faint, standing on the porch. It was only there for a breath, maybe less. A blur between lightning and shadow. But I saw it, tall, still, facing the door. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring, waiting for it to move again. The next flash of lightning showed nothing. The porch was empty. Only the chair remained, tilted slightly forward, as if someone had just stood up. I backed away slowly, eyes never leaving the door. The old floorboards groaned beneath me. The air felt charged, the silence humming in my ears. Then came another creak, not from the chair, from inside, somewhere near the corner of the room. The sound would bending, slow, rhythmic, like something had followed the sound inside. I turned toward it, throat tight. There was another chair in the corner, the one I kept by the window, empty, but shifting slightly, as though someone had just sat down. The air rippled faintly. The fire dimmed. For a moment, I thought I heard breathing. Wet, shallow, patient. The rocking continued, now inside, slow, steady, impossible. The old chair moved back and forth, untouched, as raindrops whispered against the roof. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but the words wouldn't come. The rocking grew slower, until it stopped mid-motion, tilted just slightly back. Waiting. The smell of rain drifted through the cracks in the door. The wind brushed against my cheek, cold and wrong, like something breathing too close. I looked once more toward the porch. The chair outside was still again, perfectly still, but the one inside, it wasn't empty anymore. The faint outline of a figure shimmered in the firelight, colorless, motionless, like water caught in air, its shape barely there. But I felt it, watching. I turned away, forcing my eyes shut, trying to breathe quietly. When I opened them again, both chairs, inside and out, were still, silent, waiting. The rain had stopped. I don't sit by the window anymore. I don't light the porch. But sometimes when the wind moves just right, I hear it, that slow creak of wood in the dark, as if someone's come back. and they're still waiting for me to open the door. The woods are quieter at night. Not silent, just quieter in a way that feels heavy. Like the air itself is holding its breath. It was early autumn. The trees were thinning, their leaves damp and soft underfoot. I left the cabin window open, hoping the cool air would help me sleep. But instead it brought in the forest, the scent of moss, wet bark, and something faintly metallic like rusted rain. I couldn't rest. The night pressed in too close. Even the insects had gone still. Then I heard it, my name, soft, almost tender, called from somewhere beyond the tree-line. I sat up. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, clearer this time. My name, stretched into a whisper, slow and careful, like someone testing the shape of it for the first time. The sound drifted through the trees, not far, just beyond where the light from the cabin ended. I waited. The voice didn't call again, only the rustling of branches, the faint creak of wood in the wind. I told myself it could have been anything, a trick of echo, a lone traveler passing through. But something about it felt wrong, too direct, too familiar. I closed the window. The air inside grew still, my reflection faint against the glass. I tried to shake the sound from my head. Then, softly, through the thin wood of the door, my name again. Closer now. It was the same voice. Calm, almost kind, but the tone had changed, like it knew I was listening. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The fire popped behind me, scattering sparks across the stone. The smell of smoke filled the room, sharp and grounding. But the voice came again. Are you there? The words were mine, exactly mine. My voice, steady quiet, as if I'd just spoken them. I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't said a word. I whispered, barely audible, "Go away." A pause. Then, "Go away." The same words, same tone, same rhythm. I stepped back from the window, my reflection shifting in the dark glass. The echo came again, fainter, like it was testing the words, mimicking me through the trees. I turned toward the door, heart beating fast. The air outside was moving now, faint, swirling. Something in it hummed, low and constant. "Stop." I whispered again, and from the woods, "Stop." Each word landed softer, closer. I pressed my palm against the wood of the door. It was cold, damp. My breath fogged the air. Then came a sound like movement, slow footsteps through leaves, stopping between each step. Too measured to be the wind, too human to be anything else. I didn't dare open the door, but the voice did. Let me in. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It spoke as if it was already inside. I shook my head, whispering, "No." And from outside, "No." It matched me again. Every syllable, every hesitation. I backed away. The fire flickered low, shadows crawling up the walls. My reflection in the window darkened until only my outline remained. I whispered one last thing. "I know you're not real." A pause, longer this time. Then, through the glass, "I know you're not real." My chest tightened. The voice was inside now. I could hear it not just through the door, but around me, layered in the walls, the floor, the air. It wasn't echoing anymore. It was speaking at the same time as me. I closed my mouth. The voice didn't. It spoke again, my voice, my breath low, trembling. "Come outside." The room felt smaller. The fire's light dimmed to a faint red glow. I could see the tree lean through the window, black shapes swaying in the wind. Somewhere between them, something moved. Not forward, just watching. The voice whispered again, softer, almost pleading now, "Please." And even though I didn't answer, it did. "Yes." I took a step back. The boards beneath me creaked. Outside, the voice moved with me, step for step. I blew out the lantern. Darkness filled the room. Only the faint light from the window remained, and beyond it, the outline of something still standing among the trees. It tilted its head slightly, the way I do when I'm listening. The voice called again, not my name this time, but a sound, a breath, something between a sigh and a laugh. And then silence. The woods went still again. The echo stopped. Only my heartbeat remained, loud, uneven. The night pressed close once more, soft and endless. I haven't spoken out loud since. Not one word. Because if I do, I think it'll answer. It was early morning. Mist drifted low over the lake. Quiet and pale. The world fell half asleep. Even the water seemed to breathe. I stood at the edge of the dock, watching ripples fade into stillness. The air smelled of wet wood and faintly of something older, something that had been waiting. Then I saw it, a rowboat drifting slowly toward shore. No one inside, no oars cutting the surface, just a soft pull of water carrying it closer. At first, I thought maybe it had come loose. Someone must have left it untied the night before. But the way it moved didn't look natural. It wasn't gliding. It was being guided. The current that morning was still. There was no wind, but the boat drifted straight, steady, as though following a line unseen. I crouched as it neared the dock. The paint was chipped, its edges darkened by moss and time. Water pooled in the bottom, rippling faintly, though the lake itself was calm. Inside there was only one thing, a jacket, folded neatly, placed in the center bench, dark fabric, soaked through, heavy with lake water. Each fold deliberate, almost careful. I reached for it. The fabric was cold, slick beneath my fingertips. When I lifted it, water dripped through the seams, leaving small circles on the wood. The pockets sagged slightly, weighted. Something shifted inside them, like small stones brushing together. I hesitated. Then, slowly I reached in, smooth river rocks. 5 of them, each one perfectly round, each one colder than the water itself. I turned them over my palm. They looked ordinary, but there was something about their smoothness, like they'd been held for a long time. I set them down on the bench beside the jacket. The boat tilted slightly, water lapping against the sides. The sound echoed against the dock, rhythmic, hollow. A chill moved through the air. The mist thickened, pressing closer to the shore. I could barely see the trees across the lake now, only their shadows, warped by fog. It felt like the whole lake was holding its breath. I glanced back at the jacket. The collar had fallen open, revealing stitching inside the lining, initials, WB. I didn't recognize them, but the sight of them made my chest tighten, as if I should have. A memory stirred, faint, unfinished. Something about a man who used to fish at dawn. Someone I'd seen years ago, always waving from across the water. He'd had the same jacket, dark blue, frayed cuffs, always buttoned to throat, no matter how warm the morning was. And then one day, his boat didn't come back. They searched for days. They never found him. The thought made me step back. The dock creaked beneath my feet. The air smelled heavier now. Damp earth algae, the faint sweetness of decay. The jacket hadn't been there yesterday. That boat hadn't been tied to any post. And yet, here it was. The mist brushed against my arms. Cold, almost like breath. The stones caught the light as the sun tried to rise, their surfaces slick and dark. I counted them again. 5. Then looked toward the lake, the way they'd come. The water was still, too still. I don't know why, but I felt the urge to push the boat back, to send it away, back into the fog. As I leaned forward, the jacket shifted. The stones rolled slightly, knocking against each other with a soft clack. And in that moment, the water beneath the boat moved. Just once. A small ripple, breaking outward from directly beneath the bench, as though something had touched it. I froze. My reflection wavered across the surface, thin, pale. But beneath it, another shape lingered. Just a shadow, just long enough to notice. Then it was gone. I pushed the boat gently away. It drifted backward, slow, the way it had come. The ripples spread, catching faint light between them. The jacket slumped slightly, like a weight inside it had shifted. The stones were still there, heavy in the folds. As the fog closed around the boat, I thought I saw a hand resting on the edge, pale, motionless. But when I blinked, there was only water. The mist swallowed everything. The dock, the lake, The drifting boat. Only the faint sound of rippling remained. Then even that faded. I stayed there for a long time. The air smelled of rain and wood and something like regret. And when the sun finally broke the fog, the water was empty again. Clear, but on the dock where I'd been standing, 5 small stones lay dry in the light. Perfectly round. Perfectly placed. Like someone had set them down before leaving. The kitchen was quiet. Night had settled outside, pressing against the windows. The smell of damp earth drifted in from the open door. Above the table, a single bulb hung, swaying slightly. Its light was pale, weak, buzzing softly with static. Each flicker cast shadows that shivered across the walls. At first, I didn't notice the changes, just the usual dull rhythm of dim and bright. But then the chairs, they shifted when the bulb dimmed. Not drastically, just a few inches forward. Turned slightly. I blinked. The light returned. Everything seemed the same. Yet I remember the small movement. The faucet gurgled in the sink. A soft metallic hum from the fridge. I could smell something faint, the faint sweetness of old bread. And when the bulb dimmed again, the dishes were different. A cup I hadn't used sat upright, rimmed with water droplets. A plate moved closer to the edge. I didn't breathe. The bulb flickered, and the light caught the edge of shadow that wasn't mine. I leaned back slowly. The door to the pantry, cracked before, was now wide open. Or maybe it had been closed. It was impossible to remember for sure. I touched the edge of the table. Cold, sticky in one corner, like condensation pulled from nowhere. The hum of the bulb deepened. I whispered to myself, soft, almost afraid of the echo, "It's just the light." And then it dimmed again. This time, the difference was unmistakable. The chairs were lined against the wall. The table itself seemed longer, stretching farther than it should. The kettle on the stove had shifted closer to the edge. I couldn't look away. Every flicker brought subtle changes. Objects moved just enough to unsettle. The room seemed alive, breathing slowly, watching. The light dimmed again. The door to the hallway now hung slightly ajar. Shadows pulled at the baseboards. A faint reflection of something dark in the window, though the night outside was empty. I swallowed. The bulb buzzed, low, almost vocal. Each dim a pause, a question. I took a step back, boots creaking against the wooden floor. The bulb flickered, and suddenly the chair at the head of the table was pushed out, and a dark shape sat there. I blinked. It wasn't real. Not yet. I leaned forward, hand resting on the table edge. Cold sweat prickled at my neck. Each flicker now stretched longer, lingering, as if testing me. The cup of water I hadn't touched tilted slightly, spilling a thin trail across the table. I froze. The sound was soft, but echoed in the stillness. When the bulb brightened again, the room seemed normal, yet I could feel it watching. The air smelled faintly of wet wood, of something decaying slowly. I didn't move. The hum of the bulb throbbed. Flicker, dim, bright. And then the door behind me creaked. Slowly, softly, but the light hadn't dimmed. I turned. Nothing. Just a long hallway, swallowed in shadow. The bulb flickered again. This time, the chairs were pushed together. The kettle moved slightly. The shadow by the table's edge deepened, blacker than before. I couldn't stop watching. Each blink of light revealed small differences, things that weren't there before, things that had always been there. The silence pressed in. Even the fridge hum seemed to fade. The air felt thick, wet with anticipation. The bulb dimmed once more. The shadows shifted. Not a shape, exactly, just a dark, breathing presence, its edges undefined, as if the room itself had been around it. I stepped back. Every step creaked beneath me. The bulb flickered, dim, bright, dim, and the room stretched in ways that made no sense. The window reflected my pale face. And behind me, something darker, watching. I held my breath. The bulb buzzed, vibrating in the socket. Each flicker brought more uncertainty. Every small change felt deliberate. The room alive. I couldn't turn away, couldn't close my eyes. And then, slowly, the bulb went out. Darkness swallowed the kitchen. The table, the chairs, the shadow, all of it, gone in an instant. The silence pressed close, thick and wet, and I could feel it, lingering, waiting for the light to return. I didn't move. I just listened and waited. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was late afternoon, the sun low, pale through the thinning autumn canopy. The wind stirred softly, carrying with it the rustle of dry leaves and something faintly metallic. Behind the cabin, a narrow trail beckoned. I hadn't noticed it before, or perhaps I had, but never followed. Broken branches lined its edges, snapping quietly underfoot as if the forest itself were warning me to stop. I stepped onto the path. The air felt colder here. The woods seemed tighter, the shadows closer, pressing against my shoulders. With every step, I noticed the ground, uneven, dotted with stones, and the occasional leaf slick with dew. The smell of wet moss grew stronger, pungent and earthy. Something about it made the hair on my arms prickle. Then I saw the first carving. Small, roughly etched into the bark of a young tree. A face, eyes hollow, mouth twisted, staring straight back toward the cabin. I stopped. The forest held its breath. Even the wind seemed to still. Another tree, another face, each one different, each one staring. I traced a finger along the grooves, feeling the roughness bite into my skin. The wood smelled faintly burnt, though the tree was alive. The eyes seemed to glint in the fading light. I continued along the trail. Branches snag at my jacket, the dry snap of twigs underfoot, sounding louder than it should. Leaves whisper beneath my boots. The carvings grew more frequent, faces on every tree. They weren't uniform. Some smiled, some grimaced, some were too abstract to describe, but all of them were watching. A faint breeze moved through the branches. It carried the sound of static, like faint humming, and beneath it, something else, soft footsteps, too irregular to be mine, too close to ignore. I glanced back. The cabin looked small from this distance, pale in the late light. I could feel eyes, not just carved ones, but something behind them, observing, waiting. The trail curved sharply, and I nearly lost my balance. A branch scraped across my arm. The wind smelled of decay now, wet leaves and soil turning. I heard a faint rustle ahead, and my heart jumped. The carvings were larger here. Faces stretched across entire trunks, gaping mouths, eyes too wide, too knowing. All turned toward the cabin, all watching me as I passed. I leaned close to one of the trees, smelling the bark, feeling the indentations with my palm. The grooves were damp, almost sticky. The eyes seemed deeper, darker, and I felt a shiver creep down my spine. A sudden snap behind me. I whirled, but the trail was empty. Only the broken branches, the twisted roots, and the soft whisper of the wind. I pressed forward, breathing shallowly. The carvings continued, more grotesque, more deliberate. Some faces seemed to move in the corner of my vision, shifting with the light. But when I looked directly, they were still. The trail narrowed. The canopy thickened, letting in little light. Shadows pooled beneath the trees. I could feel the forest leaning in, close enough to brush my arms as I passed. Then I heard it, a low hum, faint at first, then louder. It seemed to vibrate through the ground, through the trees, through my chest. I froze. The carving stared harder now. The air smelled sharp, metallic, like rust. Every face seemed to follow me. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to run. But something compelled me to keep going. A clearing appeared ahead, and in the center, the largest tree I had seen. Its trunk was covered with hundreds of faces, small and large, all staring, mouths agape, eyes wide, toward the cabin. I stepped closer, the wind carrying a whisper, or maybe my own breath echoed back. The hum pulsed softly. I could feel it in my ears and my fingers, in my chest. The branches above moved, but there was no wind. Shadows stretched and leaned. I pressed my hand against the bark. The carvings felt alive, shifting beneath my palm. A sudden rustle made me jerk back. The path behind me had vanished, swallowed by shadows. I could no longer see the cabin. The trees leaned inward, enclosing me. I stumbled, breath catching, heart hammering. And then I saw it, one carving that was different. It was new, fresh, and the face my own. It stared at me, mouth open, eyes wide, pointing, somehow, back toward the cabin. The hum faded. The wind returned. Branches shifted, letting a small slice of pale light fall on the carved face. I didn't move at first. I couldn't. Then slowly I turned back. The trail behind the cabin was gone, replaced by unbroken trees, shadows, and the whisper of leaves. The forest had swallowed it all. I retraced my steps toward the cabin, careful, silent. Every rustle, every snap of a twig felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to twitch. When I finally reached the porch, the cabin looked the same as before. Still quiet, untouched. But I couldn't shake the faces. All of them staring back toward the cabin, watching me, waiting. And somewhere in the woods, I knew, new carvings were forming. Just out of sight, just beyond reach. The night pressed close against the cabin. Wind whispered through the trees, carrying damp earth and pine. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold wood, heavy and still. I sat near the window, the pale light from outside stretching across the floor. The glass was cool under my fingertips. A faint mist clung to the surface, tiny droplets shimmering in the dim light. Then I noticed it, a single pattern of condensation, appearing slowly, as though someone was breathing from the outside. Soft, warm breaths pressing against the cold glass. Each puff leaving a tiny cloud that lingered, fading into fog. I leaned closer. My reflection shivered behind the mist. I could see the breath moving across the window pane, forming shapes that weren't random. Letters began to appear, slowly, carefully, writ across the glass like smoke curling in the wind. At first, I thought I imagined it. Then the words solidified. Do you see me? The air tightened. My breath caught. The room smelled sharper, wet with cold air, something metallic. I could feel a faint static in the back of my neck, like tiny hair standing. I pressed my hand to the window. The glass was still cold, but the words didn't fade. Another breath. Another set of letters formed. Closer. Look closer. I stepped back, heart thudding softly. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the shadows stretching longer along the walls. The hum of the night outside, leaves brushing together, wind over branches, grew louder. I watched the mist. It gathered again, swirling near my face. I could see faint fingerprints where something had pressed against the glass. They weren't mine. The words shifted, letters sliding together like water trickling down the pane. I know you're here. My skin prickled. The hum of the night seemed to pause, listening. The faint drip of condensation from the roof sounded too loud. I could smell the damp night air pressing through the cracks in the window frame. I leaned closer again, drawn to the glass despite the cold, despite the fear. The words changed, forming new shapes. Turn around. A shiver ran down my spine. The window steamed within too, my own breath mingling with the other. I wiped the circle, leaving the outside words untouched, hovering like shadows. Another pause. Then, do you remember? The cold pressed harder against my back. I felt something in the room with me, soft, almost weightless, brushing the air. My heart beat loud, echoing in my ears. The smell shifted, faintly iron-like, like blood in the water or wet soil turned over. The words blurred, twisting. Faces seemed to form in the condensation, fleeting, pale, staring at me through the mist. I leaned closer, unable to tear my eyes away. Another breath, a hiss, soft, almost intimate, and the letters spelled one final message. Don't blink. I didn't. I could feel my reflection trembling behind the fog. Outside, the shadows moved, bending toward the window. The night pressed closer, holding me still. Then, slowly, the condensation began to fade. The words dissolved, leaving only faint streaks across the glass. The air smelled cold and empty again. I stepped back. The cabin was quiet. Only the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath my feet. Only my own breath, slow and shallow. But I knew the window remembered. The night outside remembered. And the next time I leaned close, the breath would return. And the words would come again. The cabin was quiet. Damp wood. And the faint smell of smoke lingered in the air. Outside, the wind whispered to the trees, carrying cold autumn air inside through the cracks. I found a radio on a dusty shelf. Old, battery-operated. The dial worn smooth. Its casing smelled faintly of metal and time. I turned the knob. A soft static hummed, filling the small room. I could feel it vibrating through the floorboards beneath my feet. At first, nothing else. Just the static. A pale light from the lantern flickered across the walls, shadows stretching and shrinking with each pulse. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, breathy, almost like someone exhaling from just beyond the edge of hearing. It said my name, softly, a sound that seemed to come from the radio, but also from behind me. I froze. The hum of the static became a low vibration, filling the corners of the room. I could smell the faint tang of metal like copper in the air. I moved toward the table. The whisper followed. It described my steps. Each movement, each creak of the floor, even the faint brush of my sleeve against the lantern. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was the wind, the way the cabin settled. But the voice persisted. I touched the radio. Cold. The static hissed under my fingertips. A soft, wet sound, like a breath across glass, joined the whisper. I stepped back. The voice grew clearer. It spoke of my hand brushing the table, of my boots scraping against the floorboards, of the shiver that ran down my spine. I could feel it, closer now, not just in the room, but in the air around me, a presence that mirrored every movement, every breath. I sat down. The radio hummed. The whisper recited my heartbeat. It mimicked my slow inhale, my sharp exhale, even the slight tremor in my fingers. The cabin felt smaller. The walls seemed to press in. Shadows pulled along the corners, deeper than they should be. The faint smell of damp would turn sharp, almost metallic. I tried to speak. A single word escaped, barely audible, and the radio repeated it, warped, echoing in real time. I couldn't look away. The static fluctuated, rising and falling with the whisper. It described me in ways I hadn't realized. Movements, gestures, the tilt of my head. It knew things it shouldn't. A rustle from the corner of the room. I glanced toward it. Nothing. Yet the voice described the motion of my eyes, following the empty shadow. I stood. The radio hummed louder, vibrating through the floor. The whisper grew, speaking of my shifting weight, the creak of the floor underfoot, the brush of my sleeve against the wall. I tried to turn it off. The dial wouldn't budge. The batteries? Dead. Yet the hum persisted, the whisper tracing every motion. I stepped toward the door. It described a movement, slow, careful, almost hesitant. Even my breath, drawn in shallow bursts. The air in the cabin felt heavy, thick, as if every molecule were listening. I reached the doorway. The whisper stopped for a heartbeat, then resumed, softer now, almost intimate, repeating my name. I felt the floorboards beneath me tremble. The shadows stretched and twisted with the faint flicker of the lantern. The smell, damp, metallic, faintly acrid, pressed into my nostrils. The static pulsated through the room like a heartbeat of its own. I couldn't move, couldn't turn. The voice described the tremor in my hands, the sweat on my brow, the hesitation in my steps. It mirrored me perfectly, yet I felt utterly alone. A long pause. The radio hummed, then the whisper spoke again. It knew I wanted to leave. It knew I feared the room. It knew the precise moment my legs would falter. I sank to the floor. The cold pressed into my back. The wood slick with condensation. The hum vibrated through my bones. The whisper recited my heartbeat, my breaths, my shivering limbs. And then silence. The radio's hum faded slowly, leaving a faint static that clung to the air. The room seemed emptier. The shadows settled. The damp would smelled only of itself again. I stayed there listening. Every creak, every sigh of the cabin. The memory of the whispers lingered, echoing inside me, soft but insistent. I knew if I moved, the radio would follow, would know, would whisper again, and I couldn't turn it off. Not really. Not ever. The clearing was quiet. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. A thin fog drifted low, curling along the roots and fallen leaves. I stepped carefully into the open space. The ground was soft, cold, faintly wet under my boots. Every breath hung in the air like smoke, white and trembling. Then I saw it. A deer. Still, its coat pale in the fog, blending with the muted light. It faced me. Its eyes were empty, smooth, glossy, blank. Yet I felt it looking straight through me. I blinked. The clearing stayed the same. The deer did not move. The air smelled sharper now, like wet moss and metal. I took a small step forward. The rustle of leaves under my foot was deafening. The deer remained, unblinking, unwavering. I looked away for a moment, then back. It was closer, closer than it could have moved without sound. A shiver ran down my spine. The fog pressed against my face. I could hear the faint hum of the wind threading through the trees, but nothing else. I tried to step back. My boot sank slightly into the damp earth. Every motion I made, it mirrored silently, closer and closer. Yet I heard no rustle of hooves, no snap of twigs. The clearing felt smaller now. The shadows along the edges stretched, leaning toward the center. The air smelled earthy, heavy, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. I could feel the tension in my chest, tightening with each silent step. The deer remained still, blank eyes locked on me, unyielding. I forced myself to look away again. When I glanced back, it had moved closer still. A gentle shift, almost imperceptible, but the distance between us had vanished. The fog swirled around my ankles, rising like slow smoke. My breath was shallow, misting in front of my face. Every leaf seemed to twitch in anticipation. Every shadow trembled. I tried to speak, to call out. No sound came. The silence was complete. Thick, enveloping. I took another careful step. The deer mirrored me, closer again. Its blank gaze weighed on me, heavy and unrelenting. I felt its presence pressing in from all sides. The clearing smelled of wet pine and cold soil. The fog clung to my legs, curling higher with each step. Even the faint hum of the wind seemed muffled, distant, as if it too was afraid to move. I froze. The deer did not. Not even a flick of its ears, not a twitch of its nose. It simply watched, blank eyes empty yet knowing. I dared not look away, yet the urge was overwhelming. I turned my head slightly, trying to glimpse the surrounding trees. When I looked back, it had moved again, closer. The distance between us was gone. I could feel the cold, damp air brushing my skin. I could see the fog swirl around its legs. A heartbeat thrummed somewhere deep in the earth. Or was it my own, echoing loud in the stillness? I stepped backward, carefully, slowly. The deer followed, silent. Closer, closer. The clearing felt impossibly small. Shadows pressed in from every side. The fog wrapped around my ankles and knees, curling higher, closer, enclosing. I stopped, my chest heaving. The deer stopped. We remained like that, frozen, silent, bound in the same frozen space of fog and earth and shadow. I dared one final glance. Its eyes still empty, smooth and blank. Yet I knew somehow it had been aware of me the entire time. I turned slowly, careful not to run, careful not to breathe too loudly. The clearing stretched out, fog curling, shadows settling. But when I looked back, it was still there, watching, waiting, always closer than it should be. The hallway smelled of cold wood and dust. Evening had fallen, and the pale light from outside stretched along the floorboards. The cabin felt smaller tonight, shadows gathering closer with each fading ray. I noticed a mirror, old, tall, leaning slightly against the wall, its surface dull by time, edges flecked with tarnish. I stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of varnish and damp pine. My reflection shimmered softly, pale in the lantern light. But then I saw it, a second figure, standing just behind me. In the mirror, silent, motionless. I turned my head slowly. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Only the quiet hum of the cabin, the soft creak of the floor beneath my feet. I looked back into the mirror. It remained, the shadowed shape still unblinking, following my movements only in reflection. Not a trick of the light, not a trick of my eyes. I reached out toward the glass. The air was cool, slightly damp, brushing my fingertips. The reflection moved with me. The figure stayed behind, watching. The hallway grew colder. I could smell the faint tang of wet wood. My breath misted in the air, each exhale trembling. The shadows stretched across the walls, thick and dark, reaching toward the mirror. I tried to step away. The figure did not waver. It remained exactly where it had been. The longer I looked, the more the reflection seemed wrong. The floorboards whispered beneath my boots, a soft, uneasy rhythm. I could feel the weight of the cabin pressing in. The mirror held the hallway perfectly, except for the figure. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, it had shifted slightly. Closer, though I had not moved. Its shape blurred against the tarnished glass, shadow curling at its edges. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs refused. The air thickened, humid, clinging to my skin. The faint smell of something iron-like mingled with the pine. I took another step back. The reflection matched me, but the figure stayed, watching, waiting. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Each pulse echoed through the narrow hallway. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing across the walls. The mirror caught every movement except the figure's. I leaned closer, trying to understand. Was it a trick? A shadow from the trees outside? The curve of the hallway? No. It remained dark and still, its presence pressing against the glass. Not moving, but somehow aware. I could feel it in the space behind me. Though nothing was there, the hallway smelled colder now. The air was tight, heavy, almost metallic. I swallowed hard, my breath clouding in front of my face. The mirror's reflection was perfect, except for the figure. I reached out again. My fingers brushed the glass. The reflection mimicked me precisely. The figure did not move. It did not breathe. I stepped back. The mirror seemed to grow taller, stretching up into the shadows above. The figure loomed, just behind me in the reflection, its edges darker now, blending into the tarnished silver. I wanted to close my eyes, but the hallway felt endless, the shadows too heavy. The figure remained, always there. I took one last careful glance. It was there, closer, perhaps, but I could not be certain, only that it waited. The cabin grew still. No creak of the floor, no wind through the cracks, only the faint hum of the night pressing against the windows. I stepped away slowly. The reflection followed. The figure lingered, watching. I knew, without moving, without speaking, that it would remain, always behind me, in the mirror, silent, unyielding, and the hallway would never feel empty again. Night had fallen thick and slow. The cabin sat quiet, the air dense with the smell of pine and damp earth. Outside, the fog clung low to ground, curling around the roots and fallen leaves. I hummed softly to myself, a tune I barely remembered, barely held on to. It floated through the room, mingling with the faint creak of the floorboards. The warmth of the lantern brushed against my skin, pale and gentle. Then I heard it, a faint whistling, soft, distant, drifting through the walls. The tune, it was the same one I had hummed earlier. I froze. The air felt colder now, pressing against my cheeks. Every shadow stretched longer, darker, leaning toward the corners. I stepped toward the window. The glass was cool under my fingertips. Fog faintly. I pressed closer, trying to see beyond the soft silver of the mist. The whistling drifted closer. It wrapped around the room, brushing the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Each note familiar, yet somehow wrong. I leaned back from the window. The lantern flickered, shadows trembling across the floorboards. The smell of pine sharpened, tinged with damp soil, heavy and pressing. I listened. The tune echoed, just beneath hearing, curling around corners and doors. It matched the rhythm of my earlier humming, yet felt different, slower, sharper. Watching, I moved through the cabin cautiously. Every step on the wooden floor was soft, careful. The whistling followed. Each note lingered in the air, brushing the back of my neck. I paused in the hallway. The smell of old wood and varnish clung to me. The whistling seemed to seep from the walls themselves, curling through cracks, through boards, into the corners where shadows pooled. I stopped moving. The silence of my breath filled the space between the notes. And then I noticed it was not just outside. It was everywhere. The room, the walls, the floor, all carried the tune. I tried to hum again, to match it, to anchor myself. The whistling shifted, sharper now, echoing my own voice back at me. Closer, too close. A shiver ran down my spine. The air thickened, humid and tight, pressing against my lungs. I could smell the faint tang of iron, cold and metallic. The fog outside pressed against the windows like fingers, curling along the panes. I stepped into the kitchen. The floorboards creaked softly under my weight. The whistling followed each step, curling around the corners, rising and falling in unnatural rhythm. I held my breath. The lantern light flickered again, casting shadows that stretched impossibly long. The whistling stopped for a heartbeat, then began again, closer, echoing. I touched the wall, feeling the cold wood under my fingers. The hum of the tune brushed along the surface, vibrating softly, almost alive. Every note felt deliberate, attentive, aware. It knew my movements. I tried to leave the cabin. The door rattled faintly in the frame. The whistling shifted to match the creak, the pull of the handle. I stepped back. The melody wrapped tighter, pressing into my ears, into my chest, into the fog that clung low outside. I stopped moving. The lantern flickered one last time, shadows pooling like liquid across the floor. The whistling paused again. I held my breath. The silence stretched, taut, heavy. Then a single note drifted through the air. Soft, drawn out, familiar. I realized it was not outside. It had never been outside. It had always been here in the cabin, tracing me, following me, imitating me. I shivered. The air felt impossibly still, thick and cold. The shadows leaned in. The fog pressed against the windows, silent, watching. I could do nothing but stand, listening. The whistling resumed. Closer now, curling to the walls, threading through the corners, folding into every breath. And I understood, finally, it knew the tune because it had heard me. It remembered it, and it would never stop. I breathed shallowly. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. The tune lingered in the room, soft, deliberate, endless. I could not move. I could not stop listening. The whistling would always be here. Close. Following. Familiar. Wrong. The cabin smelled of aged wood and dust. Evening light pressed through the thin curtains, soft and muted. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of damp pine and lingering smoke from the fireplace. I noticed a panel on the wall, warped, old, slightly bowed at the edges. It hadn't caught my attention before, not fully. Curiosity pulled me closer. The wood was cool under my fingertips. A faint hum of air brushed through the crack as I pressed against it. A whisper of movement behind it. I pushed gently. The panel gave way. A hollow gap opened, dark and tight, smelling of old earth and something faintly sweet, like long-forgotten blankets. I crouched, peering inside. A crawl space. Low, narrow. The smell of dampness and decay pressed into my nose. I could see shapes, soft and shadowed against the far wall. Toys. Small, wooden, some chipped. A doll. Face smudged, its eyes dull and staring. Blankets. Folded unevenly, faded, smelling faintly of mildew and dust. Everything pressed into the shadows. Waiting, I reached in. The wood felt cold, almost slick beneath my fingers. My hand brushed something. Paper? A journal. I pulled it free. The leather cover was worn, edges curling, faintly damp. I opened it carefully. The pages smelled of mildew, smoke, and something older, sharp like iron. Inside, the handwriting twisted across the pages. Warnings. About the lake. About the thing that lingered beneath its waters. Descriptions in small, careful letters. Each word pressing fear into the space around me. I felt the floor beneath my knees vibrate with quiet pressure. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Even the fire's warmth felt distant, fading. Shadows stretched from the crawlspace, darkening the hallway beyond. I read on, descriptions of noises at night, shapes glimpsed beneath water, whispers in fog, children's voices calling, fading. The words trembled on the page, urging caution. The thing was patient. It waited. It remembered. I felt the toys under my hand shift slightly. Or maybe it was the shadows. A faint rustle. The blankets pressed too heavily against the floor. I closed the journal, holding it to my chest. The air smelled colder now, damp and metallic. The panel seemed to creak softly, as though settling back into its place. The crawlspace exhaled, dark and quiet, hiding its secrets once more. I lingered, fingertips brushing the edges of the blankets. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy. A soft hum of the cabin, the faint rustle of unseen leaves outside, and the distant sigh of the lake. I pulled back. The panel closed slowly, sliding into place with a final, muted click. The crawlspace swallowed its contents, hiding them beneath darkness and wood. I could feel the weight of the warnings still pressing against my mind. The smell of the toys, the journals, the damp earth. It lingered long after the panel was sealed. The hallway felt narrower now, the shadows heavier. I could not shake the sensation that something watched from behind the wood, small shapes shifting just out of sight. I stepped away slowly, each footfall cautious. The air smelled faintly of the lake, metallic and cold. The hum of the cabin filled the space around me, soft and persistent. I turned back once. Nothing moved, only the wall, solid and unyielding, only the shadows, stretching long into the corners. But I knew the crawlspace held more than toys, more than blankets, more than warnings scrawled in careful letters. Something lingered, always there, waiting. I breathed slowly, feeling the cold air press against my chest. The journal tucked tightly under my arm, its warnings etched into memory. I could still hear the faint rustle of blankets, the soft brush of wooden toys against one another. The cabin exhaled around me. The shadows leaned in closer. The crawlspace remained silent, and I knew, deep in the quiet, that the thing in the lake had been waiting, and it had remembered. The forest smelled damp, earthy, mossy, and faintly bitter from fallen leaves. The moon pressed in light between the trunks, silver and scattered. I stepped carefully. Branches scraped my arms, cold dew soaking through my sleeves. Each step felt too loud, echoing softly in the stillness. Some spaces between the trees seemed darker than the rest. The shadows didn't shift, even when the moonlight slid across them. I slowed. The air smelled colder here, sharp like frost and wet bark. A faint hum lingered, barely there, vibrating through the soles of my shoes. I leaned closer to one of the darker gaps. The shadows pressed in, thick and silent. I expected the trees to move with the wind. They didn't. My breath puffed in small clouds. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. Rustling leaves whispered somewhere far off, but not here, not in these shadows. I stepped back. The ground was soft, covered in damp needles and moss. I felt the weight of the dark pressing from all sides, a cold patience. The deeper I went, the darker the spaces became. They weren't simply voids. They seemed solid, heavy, shadows that watched, unmoving, patient. I paused, fingers brushing a tree trunk. Its bark was rough, alive with cold moisture, but the space beyond was still, as though swallowing the light whole. I tried to listen. The forest hummed faintly, but not with wind or creatures. It was a soft, pulsing silence, a quiet that pressed against my ears and chest. I thought about moving forward. The shadows seemed to lean closer with each step. Air smelled sharp now, metallic, like wet iron. I could almost feel it against my skin. I stopped. The moonlight shifted, and the darker gaps stayed the same. Not moving, not breathing, just waiting. I dared a step toward one. The forest floor was soft underfoot. A faint static seemed to vibrate through the air. I caught a smell, smoke, faint, lingering, though no fire was near. I pulled back. The space between the trees remained unmoved. The shadows didn't bend to the wind, didn't scatter. They just stayed dark and solid, as though carved from the night itself. I took a slow breath. The air tasted cold, sharp with pine and something older lingering beneath it. Every hair on my arms lifted with the awareness of unseen weight. I turned. The moonlight now revealed the forest as I had first seen it. Yet the darker gaps followed my vision, patient, unbroken. I could feel them even without looking. I stepped quietly back toward the cabin. Branches scraped, leaves whispered faintly, but the shadows remained still. Even as I left the forest, their presence lingered. The hum in the air, the pulse beneath my feet, the smell of wet earth and iron. When I reached the edge, the open meadow felt almost warm. The night air smelled softer here, carried the hum of distant water. But I knew the darkness waited. It had not moved. It had only observed. And in the silence, I realized the shadows would remain, watching, always waiting. Fog rolled across the lake like a slow tide, thick and damp, curling around the dock. The air smelled of wet pine and river mud. My breath came in soft clouds, merging with the mist. I walked carefully along the weathered boards, damp with dew. Each step creaked beneath me, echoing faintly into the heavy quiet. The lake was still, glassy, swallowing the moonlight in its pale reflection. Then I saw it, a lantern, dim and swaying, floating just above the water. Its light was soft, almost gentle, but the air around it felt tense. I froze. The lantern drifted closer, but the mist clung to it like silk. I could see nothing else, only the warm circle of pale light, moving slowly. The soft hum of the water brushing the shore mixed with strange, subtle vibration. I stepped forward. Wet boards whispered beneath my feet. The fog tasted cold, like ice melting in the air. My chest tightened with quiet unease. The lantern stopped at the waterline. Its glow reflected off the surface, pale and trembling. And then I saw it, a figure, pale, still, rising just beneath the water. Its hand held the lantern, hovering barely above the ripples. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it, a presence heavy and patient, pressing against the mist and silence. I inhaled sharply. The lake smelled sharper now, like wet stone and something deeper, something decayed. The figure didn't blink. It didn't shift. It simply existed, waiting in the shallow water, its outline shimmering beneath the lantern's glow. My feet felt rooted to the dock. The cold seeped through my shoes, through my socks, into my skin. Every breath sounded loud, every heartbeat louder, echoing across the empty lake. I wanted to look away. I tried, but the lantern's light held me, pale and unwavering. I saw the contours of the figure's face, smooth, blurred, almost human, almost something else. The mist curled around the figure like smoke. Water lapped softly at its ankles, barely disturbing the stillness. I could smell the lake closer now, thick and iron-like, wet with the night. The figure raised its head slightly. I shivered. There was no motion beyond that, a ghostly tilt, enough to know it was aware. It didn't speak, didn't call, didn't even breathe audibly. But the silence carried weight, pressing me back, pressing me alone. A soft breeze moved across the lake, rippling the lantern's reflection. The figure seemed to pulse with the light, pale hands steady beneath the glow. I stepped backward, slowly, careful not to make a sound. Each board whispered beneath me. The mist thickened suddenly, swallowing the edges of the dock. I couldn't see the far shore. I couldn't see the trees. Only the pale figure, hovering, patient, watching. I whispered the name of the lake, barely audible. The figure didn't respond. It didn't need to. Its presence filled the night, curling through the fog into my bones. I tried to remember why I had come here. Curiosity, yes. A need to see the light again. But the air pressed in, cold and damp, and the figure remained, still, patient, almost living in the mist itself. A soft lapping at the water echoed my own heartbeat. The lantern's glow reflected on the ripples, pale and quivering. I could see the figure's eyes now, hollows of shadow, unblinking, staring directly at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe freely. The dock beneath my feet felt far away, tenuous. The mist thickened further. Sound seemed swallowed by it. Only the faint hum of the lake and the pale light of the lantern remained. The figure shifted slightly, enough to remind me it was still there. I stepped backward again. The boards groaned softly beneath the weight of retreat. The mist clung to me, cold and wet. The figure didn't follow. It didn't need to. Its presence lingered, beyond motion, beyond water. I turned, finally moving slowly away from the dock. Every step whispered into the heavy night. The lake behind me was pale and still. And yet the lantern remained, floating at the waterline, pale hands gripping light, just below the surface. Even as I left, the mist carried it with me, the memory of its gaze, the weight of its presence, the quiet insistence of the lantern in the fog. I didn't look back. I couldn't, and the air held the echo of solitude. The cold, damp fog pressed against my shoulders as I walked toward the cabin, alone, watched, and followed by the pale light of something that would not leave. The cabin smelled of damp wood and cold air, the kind that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. Outside, fog pressed against the windows, heavy and quiet. I had woken to the soft groan of the cabin settling, or so I told myself. The floorboards whispered beneath my feet as I moved down the narrow hallway. A pale light stretched across the walls from the lantern I had left burning, wavering in the still air. Then I saw it. Faint scratches etched across the wood. At first, just thin lines, shallow grooves curling like spider legs. I knelt closer, fingers hovering above the rough surface, feeling the vibrations of the night. And then the shapes made sense. Words. Letters scratched deep enough to catch the lamplight. Help, please. The air thickened. It smelled warmer now, metallic, like iron bleeding through the wood. I traced the letters slowly with my fingertips. They were jagged, hurried, each stroke trembling. Different hands, different sizes, overlapping. I pulled back, heart rising, and the scratches seemed to move in the shadows. Another line appeared where none had been before. The words spelled out a story of fear, of waiting, a warning, desperate and quiet. I walked the length of the hallway, brushing over more words. Don't stay. Alone is worse. Remember the lake. The fog outside pressed harder against the windows. My breath came in shallow whispers. I could feel it on my neck, the sensation of being watched. Alone in a cabin that was no longer mine. I reached the kitchen. The walls there were worse, covered in scratches, curling like veins across the wood. I could see names, signatures, dates that didn't belong to me. Each word a plea, each mark a small scream frozen in time. I tried to scrub them from memory, but the air carried the weight of every letter. The wood beneath my hands vibrated subtly, as if holding its own pulse. I thought of the lake, the lantern, the figure beneath the mist, all of it threading together, pulling me into the same quiet despair. The scratches were growing. I could see new lines forming where my eyes had passed, as if the wood was alive, recording me, too. I touched the wall again, tracing one name that looked almost familiar. It felt cold, clammy beneath my fingertips, like wet stone. I shivered. A soft hum lingered in the air, low and distant, vibrating to the floor and the walls. It carried a rhythm, a heartbeat of the cabin itself. The letters seemed to shift slightly in the flickering lamplight, shadows curling over the grooves. I could almost hear whispers behind me, faint and indecipherable. I stepped back. The scratches stretched across every surface I passed. Walls, door frames, even the ceiling beams seemed marked, small pleas carved in invisible hands. A sensation of regret filled me, pressing my chest with the weight of all the voices I hadn't listened to. I could not stay, and yet I could not move. Every fiber of the cabin tugged at me, holding me in place with invisible threads. I felt each plea pierce the air, sink into my skin. The fog pressed tighter against the windows, and the lamplight flickered. I could see my own reflection in the glass, pale and uneasy. The scratches seemed to stretch toward me, long fingers crawling across the walls, reaching. I felt their presence in my bones. I whispered, almost in apology, almost in fear. The air hummed in reply, carrying a faint scent of wet wood and metal. I wanted to leave, Wanted to run, wanted to forget, but the cabin had other plans. The last line I saw, etched deep and trembling, "Remember us," and then silence. The kind of silence that fills every corner, thick and immovable. The fog pressed harder, the walls waited, and I knew I would not leave untouched. I stood in the hallway, hands hovering over the scratches. The air smelled cold, damp, and metallic, and my own heartbeat sounded loud in the quiet. I turned slowly, unable to take my eyes off the walls, unable to ignore the pleas etched in wood. And I understood. The cabin remembers. And it never forgets. The lake lay still under the pale light of an overcast sky. A wind stirred the reeds, soft and cold, carrying the smell of wet earth and water. I stood at the edge of the dock, boots sinking slightly into the damp wood. Lightning flickered across the horizon, sharp, white, revealing the curve of the shore, the trees trembling in the wind. And then nothing, no thunder, only silence, heavy and thick, pressing against my chest. I leaned close to the water, fog curling across the surface like fingers. Each flash of lightning made the lake tremble with pale light. Shadows appeared, stretched tall and long, moving through the mist. I blinked, and they vanished, leaving only the trembling reflection of the trees behind me. The air smelled of ozone, but the usual crack of storm thunder never came. It was wrong. Still, I watched, curiosity pulling me forward, toward the restless edge of the water. Another flash. Silhouettes appeared again, figures standing on the far shore, still as carved statues. Then, gone. The lake swallowed them in shadow as the light faded. I shivered. The wind brought a rustling through the reeds, whispering along the water's edge. A hum seemed to rise from the lake itself, soft, like breath beneath the surface. I couldn't tell if it was a storm or if it was watching me. Each lightning strike revealed more, shapes moving slowly through the trees, some crouched low, others tall and still. I stepped back, the dock creaking beneath my weight. I felt the fog brushing against my face, cold, wet, smelling of earth and rain yet to fall. I wanted to leave. My feet stayed, pressed to the wood. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. The shadows danced just beyond the edge of light, vanishing when the world returned to gray. Another flash, closer this time. The silhouettes were no longer across the lake. They moved along the shoreline, slow, deliberate, their heads tilting as though studying me. I swallowed. The air smelled damp and electric, clinging to my skin, my breath fogged before me. I stepped back, feeling the dock sway under my weight, though the water below was still. The storm itself felt silent. No wind howled through the trees. No raindrops fell, only the flickering light and the shapes, watching, waiting. I thought of retreating inside the cabin, but something kept me frozen. A pull, like the storm itself had memory, eyes, and it wanted me to see. The silhouettes appeared again, closer still. No faces, only shadowed forms, impossibly still, yet shifting with the light. I could hear my own breathing, harsh against the silence. The fog swirled, brushing my arms like soft fingers, carrying the smell of wet pine. I felt the cold pressing through my jacket, a weight on my shoulders, heavy and unyielding. A flash of lightning, bright white, blinding. I saw the figures clearly now, tall, slender, almost human, but impossibly still. Their limbs stretched unnaturally, heads tilting, following me even as I blinked away the light. And then the light faded. They were gone. Only the lake remained, black and empty beneath the gray sky. I stepped back, heart hammering, my hands wet with fog and cold. Another flash, farther away. The silhouettes returned, pacing slowly along the shoreline, circling, as if the lake itself breathed them into existence. I could hear a faint hum beneath it all, a vibration through the wood of the dock, through the soles of my boots, through my chest. I turned to leave. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, whispering against my ears, smelling of wet soil and something older, something waiting. Lightning flickered again. The silhouettes halted, frozen, staring, stretching toward me with unseen eyes. No thunder, no wind, only the silent storm, pulsing alive, The lake reflected nothing but darkness between flashes. Yet I could feel it, watching, waiting. I pulled my coat tighter, footsteps quiet against the dock. Each strike of lightning showed the silhouettes closer, lingering in the gray, vanishing again when the world returned to shadow. The hum of the water beneath seemed to grow louder, deeper, vibrating through the fog, through the dock, through me. I realized then, this storm was not storm at all. It was something else. And I was not meant to leave. The lake stretched ahead, black and impossible. Lightning flickered. Shapes emerged, vanished. I breathed in cold, wet air, tasted fear and fog together. The silent storm held me in place, its unyielding gaze pressed against my chest. I stepped back, slowly, as the dock creaked beneath me. Each flash revealed the figures, each absence a heavier silence. I could not tell if they would stay, or vanish forever, or wait until I left. The lake, the storm, the fog, they breathed together, alive, silent. And I knew, somewhere beneath that still water, they waited, watching. I turned fully, walking back toward the cabin, fog curling at my feet, heart pounding, and the silent storm followed. The cabin sat quiet under a pale moon. Mist curled along the forest floor, drifting through the roots and fallen leaves. I stood before the door, feeling the cold seep through my jacket, the damp smell of pine and wet earth pressing in. The door shivered. A subtle push, as if someone or something was leaning against it from the other side. I pressed my palm against the wood. It was warm, trembling under my touch, alive in a way it shouldn't be. Another push, stronger this time. The old hinges groaned. My breath caught. The fog outside the windows thickened, brushing the glass like soft fingers. I stepped back, listening. The forest was silent. No wind rustled the trees. No animal moved. Only the door quivering, pushing back against the cold night. I reached out again. The wood was slick, damp with condensation. Each heartbeat echoed in my chest. The cabin smelled of old pine and smoke, faint and lingering, as though it remembered other nights like this. I gripped the handle. Slowly, carefully I turned it. The door resisted. Then, with a final shiver, it gave way. The forest was still as a painting, quiet and dense. Every branch frozen, every leaf suspended in shadow. The mist clung to the ground, curling and swirling around dark trunks. I stepped outside. The air smelled sharper now, cold and wet, tinged with something deeper, older, waiting. My boots pressed into the soil. Footprints, fresh, pressed deep into the earth. They led away from the cabin, straight into the heart of the forest. I froze, listening. No rustling, no snapping twigs, just the silence that pressed against my ears. The mist shifted slightly, a slow swirl that seemed almost purposeful. Shadows stretched long beneath the trees, dark shapes that stayed still, yet felt alive. I tried to follow the footprints with my eyes. They vanished into the fog, swallowed by the stillness of the night. I took a step forward. Another. Each movement sounded loud, echoing against the quiet. The air felt thicker here, the damp pressing against my skin, clinging to my hair and clothes. Something moved, or I thought it did, a shift of shadow between the trees. Or perhaps it was the mist playing tricks, curling in ways that suggested presence. My breath fog in front of me, a small plume of warmth against the cold. I want to call out. My voice stuck, swallowed by the hush of the forest. Only the soft crunch of my boots on moss and soil answered, though even that felt distant. The footprints continued, as if marking a path for me, or warning me to stay away. Each one deeper, darker, pressed like a reminder that something had walked here very recently. I leaned closer to the first step, fingertips brushing the edge of the imprint. It was damp cold, almost pulsing under my touch. Another shiver ran through the door behind me. It trembled as though echoing the path I was tracing. I felt a presence, not behind me, but alongside me, in the fog, moving in tandem with my steps. A whisper of wind brushed against my cheek, smelling faintly of earth and something metallic. I wanted to turn, but curiosity, a quiet, gnawing pull, kept me rooted. The footprints ended at a gnarled tree, half hidden in mist. I scanned the forest around it. Nothing moved, Nothing breathed, yet the silence itself seemed to watch. The air hummed faintly, vibrating to the soles of my boots, through my chest, through my pulse. I stepped back, feeling the fog curl around me, soft, almost tactile, like fingers brushing my arms. The door behind me stopped shivering. It hung quiet, still as the trees. The forest remained motionless, though the footprints were there, pressed into the earth, a silent reminder that something had passed, something that might return. I closed the door gently. The latch clicked, muffling the forest's heavy breath. Inside, the cabin smelled warmer, safer, though my skin still prickled with the damp cold. I leaned against the wood, listening. Silence pressed in, thick, patient, unyielding. The footprints outside remained in my mind, fresh in the soil, waiting. And though the forest seemed still, I knew the night had not yet ended. I stayed pressed to the door, still, quiet, alone with a lingering sense of motion, of presence, just beyond the threshold. Outside, the fog curled and the forest waited. And I did not move. The air was thick with early morning fog. I stood at the edge of the lake, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Mist clung to the surface of the water, curling and folding like smoke over glass. The lake lay still, too still. The usual ripple of wind, the soft hum of insects, even a distant call of birds. Everything was muted, absorbed by the heavy quiet. I leaned closer, eyes tracing the mirrored surface. At first, I saw only myself. My reflection bent slightly in the pale light, a pale outline, damp hair clinging to my forehead. Then the surface shifted, or maybe I did. The reflection changed. Not me now, but the memory of me arriving at the cabin days or weeks ago. The cabin was sunlit then, doors open, smoke rising lazily from the chimney. I walked along the familiar path, unaware of what waited. The memory clung to the water, cold and unblinking, every detail perfect, yet wrong. The leaves shone too brightly. The mist hovered at just the wrong height, curling in ways it never could. I crouched lower, fingertips brushing the water. It was cold, unnaturally so, smooth beneath my touch, like oil or glass. My breath fogged the air. The faint rustle of leaves reached my ears, distant yet sharp. The reflection did not move with me. I lifted my hand, and the figure in the water stayed still, stepping forward when I had not, pausing when I leaned closer. The smile on my own reflection in the memory was faint, almost imperceptible, but I felt it before I saw it. A shiver ran down my spine. The forest behind me, dense and silent, pressed against my skin. Every shadow seemed deeper, darker than it should have been. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, measured, echoing in my ears. The surface rippled, a small, deliberate wave, not from wind, but something beneath. The reflection flickered, the memory distorting. The cabin now leaned, doors slightly ajar, smoke curling in unnatural spirals. The figure I had been replaced with something else, dark, faceless, lingering in the corner of the water. I stumbled back. The ground beneath me was damp, sticky with fallen leaves. The fog swirled at my feet, whispering, brushing against my ankles like soft hands. I looked again. The lake was calm once more. Still glass, still reflecting that first day, that naive step into the woods. Yet the air felt heavier now, charged with something waiting, patient and silent. I reached out with both hands, pressing my palms together, trying to summon courage. The water shimmered under my fingers. The memory wavered, as if acknowledging my touch, but not bending to it. The figure remained, watching, unblinking, unmoving. A faint hum rose from the lake, soft, almost inaudible, vibrating to the fog, the earth, my bones. I held my breath. The reflection seemed alive now, the edges of the image curling like smoke. I stepped back from the water. The mud clung to my boots, cold and heavy. My fingers tingled from the chill, yet I could not tear my eyes away. The stillness of the lake had become oppressive, a weight pressing into my chest. The memory lingered, looping endlessly. Me arriving, me standing at the cabin door. The world around perfect, innocent, yet haunted by something unseen. And beneath it all, the quiet knowledge that this reflection remembered more than I ever had. I breathed slowly, trying to steady myself. The fog shifted, thin and pale, revealing the forest beyond in jagged, black silhouettes. The water remained smooth, indifferent, holding that moment frozen in time. I realized then that I had come here expecting the present, expecting reality. But the lake did not care for present. It kept the past, the memory, the warning, all wrapped in glass and mist. I turned away. The soil sucked at my boots, damp and unyielding. Each step backward echoed softly in the quiet. The mist followed, curling around my legs, whispering, soft and patient. I glanced once more at the lake. The reflection had not changed. It waited, holding the memory like a secret, untouched by my presence, untouched by time. I shivered. The fog thickened. The air smelled damp, earthy, with a faint tang of something older, waiting beneath the still water. I could hear only my own breath, shallow, measured, trembling. I stepped away from the edge. The lake remained silent, still, immovable, and in its glassy surface, the memory of my arrival lingered, unmoving, unchanging, patient, a warning wrapped in beauty. And I could not look away. The night was dense, thick with fog that clung to the cabin like a second skin. I stepped onto the porch, boots heavy with dew, breath clouding in the cold air. The lake lay beyond, black and still, reflecting nothing but the pale glimmer of the moon. Every sound seemed sharper here. The rustle of leaves, the soft hum of insects long gone, a distant splash that might have been a fish or something else. Even the wind felt deliberate, pressing against my skin, sliding between my fingers, curling into the cabin like it knew secrets. I tried to settle, tried to tell myself it was just the night, the fog, the isolation. But shadows moved differently tonight. They lingered longer, stretched and paused where they should not. I could hear it then, a soft, scraping rhythm along the walls. Not nails, not claws, but hands. Multiple hands. Whispering, tapping, scratching. Each sound distinct yet impossibly distant. I froze. The cabin felt smaller now. The air heavier. It pressed in around me, thick with anticipation. A faint hum rose beneath my feet. Low, vibrating, almost imperceptible, but I could feel it in my chest. The floorboard seemed to shift with it. Subtle dips and rises beneath my weight. The room smelled faintly of smoke and wet wood, old and lingering. I moved toward the window. The lake reflected nothing of the sky, only shadows curling across the surface like smoke. And then I saw them, not figures, exactly, but presences, pale and wavering, stepping silently through the mist. They paused near the tree-line, watching, or perhaps waiting. I turned back to the cabin. The walls pulsed softly, the scratches forming new shapes as though they were alive. Words emerged briefly, etched in the wood, pleading, desperate, then fading back into silence. I understood, without reading. I was not the first. I would not be the last. The air thickened, almost tactile, brushing my face like soft fingers. A shadow lingered behind the doorframe. I knew it had been there the entire night, and all the nights before, waiting, watching. I did not try to speak. The room swallowed my voice. A sudden creak from the ceiling. The floor groaned beneath some invisible weight. The hum deepened, vibrating through my bones. I pressed my palms to my thighs, grounded myself, but grounding offered no comfort. Outside, the lake shifted subtly. The mist twisted, curling higher, thickening like a living thing. I caught a pale glint, something moving just beneath the surface, and then stillness. The kind of stillness that waits, patient, knowing. I sank to the floor, knees to chest, feeling the cool wood through my clothes. Breath came shallow, uneven, each inhale sharp, each exhale fading into the cabin's oppressive quiet. I let the fog, the shadows, the whispers press over me. They were part of the night, part of the lake, part of the cabin itself. I realized that I was alone, yet not alone. The presences moved with me, around the walls. They did not threaten. They observed, patient, endless, and in their quiet, I found a strange, unwelcome acceptance. The scratches on the walls shimmered faintly, letters reshaping. Welcome, they seemed to say. No sound accompanied the writing, only the slow understanding that my arrival had been anticipated, and my leaving would not erase me. Not truly. I looked to the window once more. The lake mirrored nothing of the sky, only the long history of arrivals, departures, and those who lingered. A soft wind rippled its surface. Shadows shimmered, then vanished. The fog swallowed them entirely. I let myself breathe. The cabin exhaled with me. The floorboards hung beneath my weight, synchronized with the pulse of the lake outside. I closed my eyes, accepted the night, the mist, the quiet congregation of presences that waited endlessly. A final glance around the cabin. Empty chairs, silent walls, the faint scent of damp wood, and lingering smoke. I understood now. The cabin was not mine. It had never been mine. It belonged to all who had come before and all who would follow. I sat still, still enough to hear my own heartbeat, steady and unafraid, yet aware. The fog pressed through cracks in the door, curling around my legs, climbing slowly like water. Outside, the lake reflected nothing but its endless memory, the arrivals and departures, the silent witnesses. I let the night have me. The isolation, the quiet, the convergence of all sounds and shadows. I was a guest, as they had been, and the lake would remember me, like it remembered all others, forever waiting for the next. The window creaked. A shadow shifted behind the curtains. But I could not move. I was already part of the night, already part of the lake, already part of the cabin. And I finally let the silence claim me.